Welcome to TINAH Talks, where time is not a healer, but we believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our mental well-being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well-being marketplace, a community platform at timesnotahealer.com, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support on your mental well-being journey. We're your hosts, Sophie and Kelsey, and today is specifically a TINAH Talk interview where we'll be interviewing Sophie, the CEO of TINAH, about her own personal mental well-being journey. Hey, Sophie, how's it going?
All good, thank you. Yeah, we wanted to do some episodes like this so that you can kind of hear from other people, like the experiences that they've been going through, right? Like, I think one of the aims of TINAH is to destigmatize the conversation. And we wanted to share our personal stories on here as well to help do that. Both of us are very comfortable talking about our mental health, but I know that a lot of people aren't. And it comes not very naturally to a lot of people to open up about how they've been feeling and seek out help. But we're on a mission to change that, right? Because we know that the more that you talk about it, the more comfortable you feel with your emotions and handling your emotions and how you're feeling and the things that you're experiencing, the easier it actually gets. So yeah, that's why we wanted to do these episodes basically. So today I'm under the spotlight.
Yeah, Sophie was a brave one to be our first interview. So I guess let's get started. Why don't you tell us a little bit about when you first realized you were having issues with your mental health?
Yeah, so for me, my personal experience where I realized that I had issues with my mental health was when I was about 26 years old. And so in 2018, and it started around the January of 2018, and I just started to feel like I just didn't know what direction my life was going in anymore. I was in a long-term relationship at the time. I wasn't that happy. But I was kind of pretending that everything was fine and like kind of a bit blindsiding myself of like how I actually felt, and like everything I was doing, I just didn't feel like had a purpose anymore. I was just feeling a little bit like lost and confused, but I would just continue plodding through, making small changes here and there. Like I took myself on a group trip by myself, started solo traveling again, like trying to do things that brought me back to me. And then I experienced a really, really, really not very nice breakup. And that sent me on a downward spiral from there, honestly, where I started experiencing daily panic attacks. I had like very severe anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. I didn't eat for about 3 months. I'd just eat chocolate bars. Like I really wasn't in a very good place. I couldn't see that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And that lasted for about 8 months, 6 to 8 months, I'd say, where I like was in that really the thick of it, like didn't really couldn't see a way through like all of the things I was experiencing. But this was the first time I was experiencing something this heavy, and I didn't really understand it. So all I wanted to do was make myself feel better. Like I'm very much if I've got a problem, I try and find a solution for it. And I knew that this wasn't me. I knew that I didn't normally feel like this. So I went on a quest to try and change that, basically. So I put myself into therapy. I started like trying to do all of the different things that I thought I was supposed to be doing, but at the time actually I wasn't really doing anything. I was just like trying to like basically make myself busy to forget about my problem.
Yeah.
And try and overcome it. And now that
Well,
when I got to a point where
well,
I understand,
so
sorry, go for it.
yeah, no, before you go down to the point of understanding, all of that, I just want to I want to walk our listeners through this kind of like step by step, right? Because that's a really great overview of what you realized and what that entire time period was like for you. But to get a little more concrete, you said, so it sounds like you were having anxiety. You were having anxiety attacks or panic attacks, which there is a difference between the two. We don't have to get into the difference. It sounds like there was a little bit of a loss of the sense of self. And I'm not sure if you would say that you were experiencing anything like depression. And you did touch on this a little bit, but I'd love to know like what how did those feelings of anxiety, loss of self and all that actually present for you in your body, right? Like we could say, oh, I've had an anxiety attack, but it's different for everybody. And just so people really understand what is that? Like, how did you experience that emotionally? How do you experience physically in your body? What were some of the thoughts that were going through your head at the time? Just to like go back to that experience so we know what that was.
I'm in a therapy session. Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. So like when I first started experiencing that, that sense of lost sense of self, I'd say at the beginning before the breakup, it felt like I was very disconnected to everything that I was doing. That's the only way I can describe it. It's like I was watching my life from a bird's eye perspective and I wasn't really living. I wasn't being present. I was constantly thinking about the future or things that happened in the past. I wasn't living in that present moment. I wasn't really experiencing what was happening around me. And it just felt like I was having a bit of an out of body experience for about that first 6 months. Then I went through the breakup and that then obviously escalated all of these feelings and they all bubbled up and that was the boiling point and the volcano erupted. And I can only, anyone that's gone through a heartbreak will know that that like actually causes physical pain. And when I remember getting to the point where I was like, I need to get some help because I was doubled up in pain, could not breathe. My chest was like, all I can describe is that someone was doing that on my chest, like pressing down,
pushing on it.
really, where I was doubled up in pain on the street in central London, going to work, where I just couldn't breathe. I was like hyperventilating. I was crying. I was like having gut issues. I couldn't eat anything. My brain was like a flipping train station, like thoughts going in and out constantly. I just wasn't functioning as a human being, honestly. And like I remember there was multiple times I worked at the time. I was a buyer for Kate Spade, and in itself that also experience, because at the same time, you know, when life just has a habit of like just making everything crumble around you, my job was also kind of crumbling around me as well, because our company had just been bought out by another company and they were making lots of people redundant. They weren't giving promotions, pay rises, so all of the security that I had gone. Like I didn't have that much security, so I was really like trying to like find, like hold on to something that felt stable, and nothing really felt stable. So like I remember being at work and just sitting at my desk daily, like having to run to the toilet pretty much every half an hour to just have a panic attack and cry, and that lasted for about a month. And then I would have panic attacks maybe once a month, where it would be like I could just be walking down the street, for example, and something would come into my head and I'd start going crazy in my brain about it, thinking about it over and over again, all of the possible worst case scenario outcomes. And that again, the chest pain would hit me like as if someone's just punched me in the chest. I'd have like that hit feeling in my stomach, and I would just explode into tears and like be uncontrollably crying. And like just completely uncontrollable, honestly. And then there was a point as well where I would literally, that would happen to me in the car, which obviously isn't ideal. I'd be driving and all of this emotion would just bubble up, and I would just have the same experience. Like my chest would be like if someone's pounding on it. I'd burst into tears. So yeah, it was presenting to me in like a lot of different ways. In terms of the anxiety, I wasn't necessarily having anxiety attacks. I just had general anxiety all the time. Like I was constantly feeling like overwhelmed, constantly worrying about every single thing that was happening in my life, because like I say, everything was happening at the same time. I didn't really feel like I had a sense of security. I was also at the same time buying a property. So, oh my God, this actually feels like it's a full circle moment, because I'm going through something very similar at this very moment in time, but this is how I can say that I've grown so much, because the way that I'm handling situations that are happening in my life right now are completely different to the way that I was handling them at that time in my life. So the things that I put into practice to eliminate my anxiety, to stop panic attacks, stop feeling that overwhelm when things present now, has definitely helped me change how to handle it.
Well, that's a good thing. That's a fantastic thing. Well, so this makes me wonder, and I'm curious to ask, right? I did touch on this in an episode. There's different ways that we cope with things. There's like how we cope with the immediate overload of emotions and the overwhelm. And then once that kind of simmers down, we have like our everyday coping to manage our mental health. And then we have further coping mechanisms to help improve our well-being. And I know you said at some point you decided to go to therapy, and that's more of like that everyday trying to cope. Like that's a tactic you probably put into place. It might be helpful for our listeners to know, like, when you were having like the big overload of emotions, how did you cope? And then, and I know you decided to get therapy at some point, but then how did you continue to figure out how to cope moving forward and to go in the direction of like improving mental well-being overall?
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't coping. I was masking. I was masking all of the emotions at that point, because if I look back at it, although I understood what was happening to me, I understood I had anxiety, I understood that I had depression, I understood that I was having panic attacks, I just thought that I could sweep that under the carpet and just go about my daily life and crack on, and therapy would cure everything. I didn't really think that I had to change to see some kind of result. So yeah, I got to the point like very quickly within like the first few weeks of experiencing that, where I signed myself up to a therapy service. At the time, I put myself onto the waiting list for like the public health service therapy, but very quickly came to realize that that therapy wasn't really what I needed, and the waiting list for that was 18 weeks at the time, so 4 months.
That's a long time.
Waited 4 months. So luckily, thankfully, and not everybody has the privilege of this, at the time, like I say, I was employed. Through my employment, I had private healthcare. I was able to go through my private healthcare and get a 10-session talking therapy, support, counselling. And I worked through some of the things that were happening on the day-to-day basis with that therapist on a weekly basis for 10 weeks. And I managed to get that within a couple of weeks of like me asking for it. So that was really helpful to work through what I was feeling at that moment in time, but to actually get to help me on a more longer term basis with like managing with the anxiety and things like that. At that moment in time, I didn't know how to handle it.
I was gonna say like the long-term habit changes so that you could like stay resilient and work towards the mental well-being.
That has come way later. Like none of that
Okay.
changed me in that moment where I was at my rock bottom, because all I was focusing on was surviving through the day to day. So that was the therapy. Later on, when the symptoms carried on presenting, was when I realized I needed to change something about myself to actually see longer term.
Yeah. Which I just want to let people know, just in case you don't, because this was something that I had to learn, and obviously Sophie learned, that when you are surviving, you're surviving and you're not expected to be working towards being more resilient and working on your mental well-being. And so just know that like that's normal, just for anyone who's listening.
For sure, it's definitely normal. But yeah, for me, the longer term habit changes, that didn't happen, I'd say maybe until about 2 to 3 years after that rock bottom moment. Like I still was in therapy throughout that time period, like in moments of need. I was making changes in my life, so when things weren't like feeling like they were aligned with me, I would very quickly make those changes. But in terms of like actual habit and behavior changes, that happened probably when I'm just before I moved, the year before I moved to Bali, so in 2021. So that meant that rock bottom moment was in 2018, and then I really started like changing my habits and behaviors in 2021, I'd say.
What was the first step of you like making a change?
My first step, I'd say, was that I went through another period of life change where pandemic, a lot of people did. I quit my job to go traveling, and the pandemic hit, couldn't go traveling. So obviously we were stuck in lockdown. I was living in London in my apartment at the time. And my mental health wasn't awful, but it also wasn't at its best. It was kind of like somewhere in between. But I decided, because I had quit my job, that I was going to start a business and I couldn't go traveling. So like I needed an income somehow. So I starting a business, and that gave me a sense of purpose. So from that point onwards, I realized that I needed to change as a person to be able to run this business, because my head and all of my habits and behaviors were that person that I was when I was employed. And that doesn't translate very well. I came to realize when you're running a business, because you need a whole different set of habits and behaviors. So as I went through that experience of running a business, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned things that I did and didn't have. For example, I had no boundaries. And what I started to realize was that I was being presented with situations and I was just saying yes to things and then hating it and getting angry about it and getting annoyed. Because another thing that I forgot to mention, something that really presents in me when I feel this way and when I'm experiencing anxiety, is anger and frustration. And funnily enough, I remember when I was a teenager, my parents used to always be like, "You're such an angry person." And now I can look back at that and be like, no, I've always had anxiety. It was just presenting and I didn't know what it was. So we can talk about that later on. But since that time, like that I started the business, that's when I started to recognize some of the feelings and why I was feeling that way. And then I was like, oh, I clearly don't have any boundaries, which maybe then, as I was speaking to my therapist about this, she was like, well, maybe the reason you don't have the boundaries is because you don't feel like you're worthy of having the boundary. And that's when I started deep diving into my behaviours. And that was then I went back to the NHS, which is Public Health Service in the UK, to get a course of cognitive behavioural therapy. So right in the middle of the pandemic, around January 2021, I'd say, I started doing cognitive behavioural therapy. And that is when this process of changing all my habits and behaviors really started kicking in, because I started to understand why I was the way I was, how certain situations in my life had presented and made me the way that I was, and what I needed to do to shift some of the things that I was experiencing, because some of those things were still causing me anxiety.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Just for some of you who like aren't very familiar with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it really focuses on your thought processes and like what are the narratives that you are telling yourself, and starting to be aware of whether that narrative is actually true or is it simply a story, because our brain can sometimes just make up wild things, and we've learned a lot of things and experiences through our life, so it's influenced by, like, think about rose colored glasses. Everything that we perceive and experience in our life then affects the way that we think about things and past experiences and all of that. And so being able to be aware of what your narrative is, and then is it real? Is it true? Is there things that go against it? And how can we actually reframe it and change it? And then what does that look like when it influences our emotions and our behaviors? That's like the subsect of CBT, just for those who are unaware. But I think that's fantastic. So you started with taking action by doing CBT, and then like how was the rest of your like self-healing journey looked like for your own mental health and everything?
Yeah, so I started to realize that I was in the wrong environment. Around that same time that I was going through the cognitive behavioral therapy, I started to understand some of my habits, some of my patterns, some of my behaviors that were presenting, that were probably the cause of the anxiety. And then I started to realize that, I was working from home all the time. Like, don't get me wrong, I loved my home at the time, but I'm a very, like, if you know my background, I travel a lot. I like to experience a lot of different things. I like to meet new people. I need change to thrive, and I need like a bit of like adrenaline to thrive. Like, say, like different
Action.
yeah. Like, I don't do well when I'm just sitting still. And at that moment in time, my focus was literally just on my business, building this business, because I was in survival mode because I didn't have an income. So I needed to build the business. So I took myself out of my home, started putting myself in co-working spaces, only a couple of days a week, and like started realizing, like, for example, I had no motivation to go back to the gym. Like, even though we'd been off of the gym for about a year because gyms had been closed in England, I was really struggling to get back into the gym, and I started recognizing the fact of why I didn't want to go to the gym, because my gym wasn't very nice. Like, my gym was dirty, it wasn't clean, like it didn't feel like a nice environment to work out. And I started realizing, oh, like I'm actually very sensitive to the environment that I'm in, and the gym, I'm not wanting to go and do the activity because I don't like that environment. So I need to find an environment that is supportive of me wanting to go to the gym, because I love the gym, I love exercise, but that environment wasn't giving me any inspiration to go. So I started recognizing things like that, where like it wasn't just my habits and my patterns and behaviors, it's also that I'm really sensitive to my environments. And like, if I'm going to the gym and I'm like building up this narrative in my head of being like, oh, I can't go to the gym today because what if I get COVID, for example, because they haven't cleaned the squat rack. Like, these were the kind of stupid thoughts that were going through my head. Not stupid thoughts, let's rephrase that wasn't a stupid thought. The thoughts that my anxiety was telling me in my head that were preventing me from going to the gym. So, you know, like, I started to recognize that. So I started to make changes in my environment. And then I also realized that actually, like, the UK for me wasn't really the right environment. I really do need to, I do better when I'm like in sunshine. I have a bit more flexibility. I can go out and not have to worry about it raining, for example. And I'd lived abroad before, I've traveled a lot, as I said. So I decided to move my whereabouts to Asia. And started living in a different environment, and that was then really the kickstarter for me to like go on like a real self-healing journey, because I was in an environment that supported that, and around other people that were also working on themselves. Because I think up until that point I hadn't been surrounded with people that were doing the work on themselves. I'd been surrounded with people that maybe had dabbled in therapy and like thought that that was like them doing the work, and like that was it. But I hadn't really been surrounded by many people, so I hadn't been influenced to do it. And then I came to Asia and I lived in Bali for a while, and so many people were doing different things to work on themselves that I was like, oh, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try that. And it was a bit of a trial and error process to begin with. One of the main things I started with, which I'd actually started doing in London, was going to yoga and starting to figure out like my relationship with my body, and my breath, and like sitting in stillness. And at the beginning for me that was so hard. Like, I used to think I didn't like it because the teacher wasn't good, for example, but actually it was, I didn't want to sit with myself in that environment. So these were all things that I came to realize way later on when I look back at it. But yeah, for me it wasn't just a let's get into changing these things. It was very much a process and a trial and error process. That, because there's a lot of things that people would tell me and recommend me to do that I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I'd try it and be like, oh, maybe, and then get into it, for example.
Yeah, it's kind of about finding what felt right for you, but like a lot of it's out of your comfort zone, right? So it is that like, no, okay, maybe I'll try it. I remember, I think I had the same thoughts about like meditation and breath work. I was like, whatever, it's not for me. Yeah, no, I love that. And then when you moved to Bali, that's when we met. And I remember you were going through it in Bali. You were trying to like really work through some stuff. So I guess like I'd be curious to know, in all of this, in your journey of working on yourself and trying to improve your mental well-being, have you had any breakthrough moments that you can think of that you were like, oh, it all makes sense?
Yeah, I think there's a few. Like, I think a really big one for me was going to CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, because that really helped me start understanding trigger points that I had and things that would set off my anxiety. Like, to give you an example, and this is just a tiny little thing, but it used to trigger me so much, was timekeeping. And I remember it coming up in one of my first CBT sessions, and they would be like, well, would it describe a situation, for example? And then he would be like, well, what exactly triggered you about that situation? I'd be like, well, it's because he was late, he disrespected my time. And like, I was like, again, anger presents in me when I'm anxious about something. And I remember thinking like, but why? Like, why am I so angry about this stupid little thing? Like, it really isn't a big deal. Like, he was 5 minutes late. Like, why am I so angry about that? And like, the therapist really started to try and change my thought patterns, like around time, and slowly and surely I've gone over my frustration around that specific trigger and understood where it comes from as well. And like, I think for me, I'm a very logical person. I'm very emotional, but I'm also very logical. Unfortunately, I have two very strong sides of me that balance each other out sometimes. But I needed to understand for me to be able to move past some of the things. And that was a real breakthrough for me, because I started to understand some behaviors. The other breakthrough was kind of letting go and just allowing things to be and live more presently. I think I 100% used to be guilty of living in the present or the past, the future or the past, and living more presently and learning how to live more presently and live in the moment more and go with the flow has also been a massive game changer for me, because that is where you're most, honestly, that's where you're going to be most at peace, if you're not worrying about the future or the past.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they say, that when that's the whole Kung Fu Panda quote, tomorrow, I always butcher it every time. Tomorrow is unknown, yesterday's in the past, today is a gift. That's why they call it the present, or something like that. And it's a hard thing to do, especially when you are constantly stuck worrying about things, or you're feeling shame, guilt, or whatever other uncomfortable emotions about past stuff that we can't change. So it's definitely, that's a big feat. So good for you for like really learning how to keep yourself in the present moment. I guess this brings me to a question of like, have you had any setbacks, right? Like, my understanding is with mental health and mental wellness, it's on a spectrum that is fluid. So we can go back and forth between things. And so I'm curious, like, have you had any particular setbacks that you've noticed, and how'd you kind of work through it?
Constantly. There's like, I always feel like I take 3 steps forward and like 10 steps back. I know you shouldn't look at it like that, and actually, even if you're making small progress, you're making progress. But like, I personally, for me, I've always had a lot of patterns of behaviors and patterns of things that have happened, and like reoccurring things that keep coming up for me. And I always think, oh, I've got over it, and then it happens again. And then I'm like, oh, I've got over it again, and then it happens again, and it just keeps knocking me down every single time. And I get, again, it presents in frustration and anger, and I'm like, but why? Like, I've worked on this, I've done the work, like, why does it keep presenting? So yeah, all the time I feel like I'm being set back, and it's usually from like external factors that are out of my control, in which case they're out of my control, so I really have to just trust and let it play out, because I can't do anything about it. And that's another part of like handling anxiety, is to understand what you can control and what you can't control, what you need and what you want. Because I think when you start understanding those things, it becomes a lot easier to manage, because you're not necessarily always focused on the wants or the things that you can't control. You're focusing more on the things that you actually need and the things that are in your control, and that then helps eliminate so much pressure in some of the situations. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing is with setbacks, there's no such thing really as a setback, because I now rephrase that and look at it as lessons. Like, everything that I feel like maybe is a setback, or like I'm in a limbo period, for example, it's just a lesson. You have to take what you can and learn about yourself from those, the things that are setting you back, because that's what's then going to move you forward. So I like to try and rephrase it and call it a lesson rather than an actual setback.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a beautiful lesson in and of itself. Okay, so I know, I mean, I think all of that is like really, hopefully will be really helpful to anyone who's listening. But if you were to give, any really concrete things, are there any particular products or services or apps that have helped you with all of these lessons and with the journey in and of itself?
For sure. So there's a couple of things that I would recommend. Some are more logical, some are more on like a spiritual level, because I've found a lot of my healing come from a little bit of more of a spiritual side of things. I've never previously associated with any form of religion whatsoever, and I still don't, but I have found a lot of peace from doing like more spiritual meditations, like hypnosis meditations. So there is a app that I was recommended actually by somebody that I associated with in Bali, and she really highly recommended it because she had experienced something very similar to me. And I'd tried meditating before and I hadn't really been able to get into it. And this particular app sends you into like a hypnosis subconscious state and allows you to kind of dig into the problem and reprogram that thought. So similar concept to how you try and do it in CBT, but it's more done in your like subconscious. And like, for example, there's inner child workshops in there. So thinking about things that maybe you didn't get and you maybe needed as a child, and like really understanding where your trigger has come from in your previous experiences of life, because everything that we're experiencing in our present moment is because of something that has happened to us in a past moment. So me understanding that through some of the workshops that I was experiencing through this particular app, it's called To Be Magnetic, that really helped me. Like, I would say that has personally helped me more than therapy. And I also, getting into yoga and meditation has really helped me as well, because that has allowed me to stay a bit more present. I personally don't love journaling. I'm not that big into gratitudes and things like that. It's not really for me. I struggle a bit with it. But trying to do more like meditations, particularly when I'm in the right environment. So I think I've mentioned it before that I love going to the beach to do my meditations, because that feels like it's the perfect environment for me to do it in. That really helps me, and just finding things that always bring me joy no matter where I'm in the world, because I travel a lot. I think we spoke about it last week, but like, for example, whenever I'm sad, I go to the mall. Or whenever I'm feeling like overwhelmed or anxious, because it's one of those activities that wherever I'm in the world, the mall's the same, right? Like, I don't feel like it's an overwhelming place, and it feels like a safe space. So I try and find the safe space wherever I am to retreat to try and get myself feeling a little bit better, so that I'm in a better position to do whatever I need to do to help me. But no, for me, there's three things. It would be the app, the To Be Magnetic. The app Balance is super great for meditation. I rate it. I've had the subscription for over a year now, and I think the meditations on there are great. It's particularly brilliant if you are a beginner. And then the third thing would be to practice some form of physical activity that is relevant to you. For me, it's been yoga and Muay Thai. Love Muay Thai because it's a full body workout, but it's also really good for your cognitive brain, because you have to think about the movements that you're doing. So they have been the three things that personally for me have worked really well.
Okay, very cool. All right, I've got just a couple more questions left for you, but what would you say something is that, like, where would you say you're at right now in your mental health journey? And like, is there something you're still working on in this moment?
100%. I feel like the work will never stop. And I actually said something to you, and I said it to someone else the other day, and she was like, yeah, it will stop when your life stops, basically, because you're a constant evolution. You're not meant to just stay the same all the time. So for me, yes, I'm constantly still working on things. I think there's a big thing for me coming up at the moment around like self-love. Like, I think I've done a lot of work on like self-worth, but more so now on like self-love, and like really treating myself how I want other people to treat me. I've done a lot of work on my boundaries and things like that. But no, I think we're a constant evolution, and if anyone tells you that they've done the work and that they're done, like, they're not. Like, there's always something to be changed, something to learn, something to improve. And for me, I will continue to do that, because my lifestyle and the things that I want out of life, like, I've really defined what I want out of my life. through some of these workshops that I've been doing in this Too Big Magnetic course, and that has allowed me to stay in tune with what I need to do to get those things. And that is going to require mindset shifts, behavioral pattern shifts, like overcoming certain limiting beliefs to allow for that lifestyle that I want. So they're definitely still things that I have to work on to get myself there. But I think if you can find the thing that you want and like set yourself a goal and a purpose, that you can then work backwards to figure out what you need to do to get there.
Nice. I like that. All right. Well, I guess to like wrap it up, what is your best tip for anyone who is starting out on their mental well-being journey? You know, where you were way back when, yours was kind of between 2018 and 21, but like anyone who's starting this journey, what would you suggest to them as they're getting started?
I think it's to start understanding why you feel the way that you feel, because there's always going to be a reason. If you're experiencing anxiety, there is something deeper behind that. It's not just anxiety presenting for no reason. So I think it's like trying to build your level of self-awareness and understanding of your problem, because from that point, that's where the change can happen, and that's where you can start to figure out what you need to do to make changes in your life to eliminate the symptoms that you're experiencing. I think without that, it's really, really difficult to go down a route of healing any way, shape or form, because how do you know what you're healing? So although you're living in the moment with the anxiety, once you're feeling able to starting to understand where that's coming from is going to be really helpful. And practicing things like journaling or like keeping track of when you're feeling certain ways and what situations you've been in is going to be the starting point for that, I'd say. So although I'm not the biggest advocate for journaling because it's not my favorite personal thing, it did help me right at the beginning when I was trying to understand those experiences. So I would write down the feeling that I was experiencing in the moment in the journal, where I've experienced it before, the trigger for that, and if there was any certain situations that I've experienced that same feeling in before, so that I can start piecing it's like a jigsaw puzzle, piecing all the bits together to see the clear picture. That's how I would describe it, and that I think is the starting point for anybody that wants to try and get into like the self-development work to improve their mental well-being.
Yeah, awareness is key, baby. Awesome. Well, I mean, you kind of shared a whole, like you gave us a point A to point Z, and I really appreciate you letting me ask a bunch of questions and dig into it in detail. And reopening a little bit of things, but I'm hoping that this conversation was a little bit cathartic for you. And I know our goal with TINAH is to really have these open and honest conversations so that people can see their own experiences and not feel alone on this, roller coaster that is life. So thank you so much for your time and sharing everything. I'm happy to wrap up the episode, but do you have any last bits you want to share?
I just want to say, like, I feel like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent on this episode, because that's a direct reflection of like how the journey has been. Honestly, it has been a bit all over the place, and that is normal. And it's not just going to be a linear, I'm going to feel better if I start doing X, Y, Z. That is just not what happens. And I just want to caveat with that, because I think it could be really easy to hear, oh, well, she went from feeling like this to feeling like that, but no, there was a whole lot of chaos and mess in between, and there's still chaos and mess happening in my head and in my brain and with my anxiety and with like things that happen in my life, but I've found ways to manage it. And I think that's the key message is it's not just going to be a transformation. I'm not just going to start doing the meditations and you're going to feel better. You're not just going to start doing the journaling and understand everything that's happening to you. That's just not what's going to happen. So this conversation, I feel like I've gone off on so many different tangents because it hasn't been a linear thing. It has been has been all over the place, and that's been directly shown in how I've probably presented it. So apologies if I've lost anyone along the way, but that's just how it has been. But no, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share. I hope it has helped anybody even just understand that there's other people out there feeling in the same way that they feel. Even if you don't feel like you can take action right now, that's okay. Your time to take action will come as and when it needs to. So I think you just have to be patient and trust that you're gonna get out of it, or like try and overcome it as and when is the right time for you.
Yeah. I think all very well said. And I mean, yeah, there's, we all tell our stories and we go on tangents, but I think everything like came together really cohesive. So no apologies needed whatsoever. But cool. Well, thank you. Thank you to Sophie, and thank you to everyone for listening to our episode today. If this resonated with you, be sure to give us a like, and we'd love to hear your feedback in the comments and what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnotahealer.com. All of the details can be found in the episode description below. And remember, you hold the power to heal. Until next time, you've got this.